do look kind of scary right now, a little disheveled. It's all right. Okay. This. So I'm hoping that I haven't heard from Jason today, who I'm supposed to be talking to about his book. So let's just give it a minute and see if he shows up. So we'll just patiently wait for a second and talk about how tired I look all the time. Oh, yay! Hi!
Hey,
How's
we
it
can talk
going?
about how tired I look too.
Oh my god, it's just, it doesn't matter how much sleep I get.
We're all in the same place, you know?
Yeah, it's an exhausting time right now.
For sure, for sure. Thanks for having me, by the way.
Of course, thanks for doing it. I was sent your lovely book,
Mm,
which I just got, so I haven't been able to dig into it yet.
no
But
worries.
so tell me about what led you to publishing this.
Well, I mean, that book is basically, I wish I had, I wanted to show you. That book is basically an adaptation of a different book that is really big. And I usually have it on hand so I can show you just how big it really is. But I don't know. My friends have been stealing my stuff. But it's a book called Stamped from the Beginning, which is a 600-page academic tome about the history of racist ideas and policies in America from 1400 to around 2016. And
Wow.
the brother who wrote it, Dr. Kendi, Dr. Ibram Kendi, who is America's foremost race scholar at the moment, he asked me if I could rewrite it and basically do a translation of it for people who might not be scholars, right? Not all of us are academics, you know what I mean?
Right.
Myself included. And to think about how would we talk about this with a 12-year-old? How would we talk about it with a 75-year-old? How could we produce something that felt like ours
Yeah.
if we're outside of the academy, you know?
Right. Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely hard to jump in to a 600-page book and try to translate that into something that I can understand. So, yeah, I'm really excited to read it, and happy to have you on here too. I see you've been doing other lives, right?
I've been doing a lot of lives. I mean, my
Yeah.
whole thing, I rock with the kids, you know?
You're
I
what?
think, I said, I'm always with the kids. So I'm
Mm,
always doing live with the kids and trying to make sure that we're providing resources
yeah.
and a little energy to the young folks who are also dealing with all the things that we're dealing with, right? We're having this conversation in some way. There's a 13-year-old having a very similar or trying to have a similar conversation to understand the world that we're living in. My
Yeah.
job is to make sure that that conversation is healthy and informed, and to help them navigate this heavy stuff.
Yeah. So, how would you, I guess, say to people who are in the midst of having conversations with their friends and family, to make sure that that it's a healthy and productive conversation?
Well, I think first we have to, I always live by what I call the offensive defensive rule, right? Like we go into these situations believing that no one is trying to be offensive, therefore no one needs to be defensive, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Right, and like trying, especially if we're talking to our loved ones. The other
Yeah.
thing is our emotions, our emotionalism comes from sometimes having a lack of information. And I think the more informed we are, the more we can sort of speak about these complicated things from a place of knowledge and not just a place of emotion. And don't get me wrong, some of the emotions are warranted emotions, right? We live
Yep.
some of us are living, especially Black people in America, we're living very different lives. We're having different experiences. And so the emotions are very real, but they can sometimes cloud our judgment and get in the way of a practical and healthy conversation. And so the book, that particular book, is just meant to give us some information, right? Do you know where racism began? Do you know who the world's first racist was? Do you know why?
Yeah.
Why? Like the book covers all of that. Do you know why racism began and what the whole purpose was? Do you know the role that media plays and has always played in perpetuating racist ideas? Do you know the role that government has played in perpetuating racist ideas? It's bigger than people. It's all about sort of systems and policies. And if we can keep it up here, right, then we don't have to take jabs at each other, you know?
Yeah. So I think it's been such an interesting experience the last month and a half or however kind of long it's been since the protests really started, and how race has become a topic for white people, I think, who had before the last month and a half, race wasn't like a topic that we were talking about. At least for me, it wasn't something that I was talking about with my friends. Or I mean, I'm a white woman. I was kind of oblivious to what was going on in our country, and now every single day, pretty much every person, every friend, every person I come in contact with, the subject of race comes up. And I think that is a sign that things are changing for the better, because it's showing me that the awareness is everywhere, and people are paying attention and learning and listening,
Yeah,
and it's kind of right in everyone's faces right now, but in a really good way, because it's now like a topic of conversation for people who otherwise weren't thinking about it
right,
before,
right.
right? So it's like, I mean, before George Floyd and sort of this revolution of protests and demands for justice was happening, was this still like, I mean, obviously you wrote this book, so this is something that you have obviously been talking about for a long time, but was this, you know, how has the last month and a half been different for you as someone who already was, well versed
Sure,
in the world?
sure. I mean, here's what I'll say. In terms of me, in terms of what's different, not much, right? So for me, it's a little more. This is a perennial issue in my life. It's something that I've had to live with my entire life. Black people are often raised in not all of us, because we're all very different as well. We're a polyolithic group of people, but many of us are raised in households where we are educated, or at least we're giving some semblance of what the world might look like for us. Because if we're not given that information, then our lives are in danger, right? So I grew up with a mother who was very much like, listen, I need to arm you with some information about the world, because the world will not understand you. So you better understand it, right? So what I'm looking at right now, um, it's just a final straw. It feels like a final straw, right? Like these sort of instances are happening in my neighborhoods. Were happening in my neighborhood my whole life. I had my own experiences with police officers as a 16, 15, 16, 17-year-old. My family, my friends, my cousins, right? This is always the topic of conversation in my community,
Yeah.
because it has to be, right? And so what I'm hoping, honestly, Lily, and I do appreciate what you're saying, but what I'm hoping is that the internet and social media and even marches sometimes will convince us that half love is whole love. And what I mean is, this is the beginning of a thing. But
Yeah.
but we have to make sure that we acknowledge that it's just the beginning of a thing. If not, then what will happen is all the people who feel motivated right now will eventually go back to their comfortable lives, where they still don't ever have to touch it, where they still can close their doors to it. When school starts up and we all go back to work and all this, that, and the third, it's going to take a different kind of effort. to stay engaged with the work of anti-racism. And if that effort isn't there, then all of this is pomp and circumstance and wonderful things for us to sort of pat ourselves on the back for right now. But Black people are still going to die, and that is the truth. It's a harsh truth, but it is a truth.
Yeah, no, it's 100% true. It's this is a movement right now, but it's also, and this term has been said 100 times. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and
Hmm.
that people need to be still continuing to educate themselves. It's not enough to look at an Instagram post every day and be like, oh, okay, that's good information, and then move along. It's like we need to keep coming up with resources, and I'm still talking to people that I've done lives with and kind of still having an open conversation where I'm like, how's it going for you now? Like, let's talk about what's going on in your life right now. What's changed, and how do you feel now? What do you want to share with the world now? And I think it's a matter of wanting to learn. You should want to learn about this.
Absolutely.
I have my eyes have been opened the past
Hmm.
month, and it feels shameful. Like, I feel ashamed of the fact that I'm 23 and just now realizing that I'm living in a very racist society,
Yeah.
which I I obviously knew racism was there and that it existed. I had no idea how day to day racism was existing in our country and in the
Right.
world. And
And
so,
how would you know?
right.
Like that's like the biggest hoax of racism, right? Is that it has a way of blanketing some and a way of completely bastardizing others, right? And
Yep.
that is sort of the phantom sort of nature of racism and race itself in this country, right? Is that for some of us, we live in a world where we never bump up against that ism, right? And for others of us, there's no way for us to ever escape it,
Yeah, yeah, of course.
and so I even think about, I mean, look, you're Lili Reinhart. You have a certain kind of power in terms of your success and your notoriety, your fame, right? These are things that you know about, sort of which is why you're using your platform, which I appreciate. It's one of those things, though, that there's going to come a day, Lili, that you're going to walk into a writer's room or on set, and you're going to have to say the hard thing, right? And that's so, like, all of this is preparation, and we have to think about these, the sort of informing oneself and taking on this information as sort of as armament, right? We're arming ourselves to prepare to do something that may be uncomfortable and difficult, to do something, right? Like, and if that means that Lili Reinhart walks into a room and says, look, I'm on this gig, I'm going to make this movie, but we need to have a discussion about why the writer's room is all white. That has to be a thing, right? Like, and I
Yeah,
think that's where the real work lies for all of the white allies and everybody who is really trying to figure out what their roles are. Your role is going to be standing in the gap, right? Using your power, your mouth, your leverage to make sure that there's a little more equity in your particular spaces, right? And I think that's all one could ask for.
yeah. I think it's so that's so spot on. It's easy to be, I'm especially the last month. All these kind of brands and companies have come out and said, like, we're allies, we support Black Lives Matter, and it's like, if you work for one of those companies that did that, great, but actually hold them accountable and make sure that when you go into work, you see Black people employed around you, and especially like, you know, companies and whomever that are supporting Black trans women and men, and how, people who want to tell trans stories aren't actually involving real trans people in telling those stories. And it's
Right.
like, so, I mean, what you said is so true, just holding people accountable. Because it's not enough to be sitting here having a conversation with you and be like, yeah, I feel you, I get it, and then go out into the real world and kind of shut my mouth if I see something that
Yeah.
doesn't seem right, because it's so true. And I want to, um, yeah, I talked with an actress, Asha. She had been on my show that I'm on, and she was saying how, some people think like if you have one black writer in a writer's room, that's enough. We
That's it.
have one, like that's enough because they're kind of it's made to seem like one black voice represents all black voices,
Sure.
and that's obviously not true.
Like checking
And
the box.
right, exactly. And especially if you have a black character, but then if they're also trans, if they're also, queer, however, like it's like, oh,
Yeah.
two birds with one stone. It's like, we can't obviously look at that way. This is not what the world looks like. Like our world is very colorful and it's very mixed. And
Absolutely.
sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're in an environment where it's a lot of white people. And that's fine.
That's fine. Yeah.
But, that can be realistic depending on what you're showing. But it's also important that when you're telling a black story, you're not just like obviously using one black voice. And
No. I think we had to look. We're always. It's a complicated thing, right? We're always fighting for equity. We're fighting for space at the table. There's always this fear that if we are first of all, we talk about diversity and inclusion, but there isn't much inclusivity. There's a lot people are working on diversity. So just because you have a black voice at the table doesn't mean that black voice has power, right?
right.
So if the black voice doesn't have power, then then it's just you saying you use that black person as a scapegoat when people say, do you have a diverse writers room, for instance? It's like, oh yeah. Jamal works for us. He's in this writing room. He's great. We love him. And it's like, well, Jamal doesn't have any say on anything happening on this particular project, but you have him in here. And because you have him in here, you're able to sort of escape some of the critique of how this is a racist institution, right? Or the same thing happens with all the Black Lives Matters sort of advertising on the NFL and the MLB and every corporate structure and entity and institution. And it's like, well, cool. Let's see your boardroom. If Black
Yeah.
Lives Matter, let me see your board. Let me see how much we matter on your board. Let me see how much we matter in terms of the equity of pay, right? Black people do a lot in this country, always have. Black women are the most educated group of people in America and have been for a very long time and yet are underpaid, right? So these are real sort of structural issues. I mean, I just looked at Viola Davis has a viral clip going around right now, but that's a very real. I mean, in my industry, as a writer, as a novelist, I fight for every penny. I've had to fight to claw my way and work twice as hard as my colleagues to have
Yeah.
the career that I have. Right? Like it
Yeah.
took a long time and twice the amount of work. Right? I've written 16 books. 16
Wow.
is how long it took. Right? And I think what we're saying is, look, we're talking about equity and fairness, not because we want handouts, but because we're good enough.
It's like you shouldn't have to fight twice as hard
Yeah.
for any just because of who you are. I mean, there's a lot of young people who come onto these lives and watch and are just trying to educate themselves. And I know it's a it's a deep, broad subject, and it can't be covered in 15 minutes. But I guess what would be something that you would say to the young people watching who are just trying to learn and trying to do better? Like, what's a really important
Oh
point
yeah.
that you'd want
I
to
got you.
tell?
Very, very simple. So there are three categories when it comes to the way that we talk about race. There are what we would normally when we normally think of racism, we think of segregationists, right? People who say that you are not allowed to do a thing because of the way you look, or you are less than because of the way you look. In our everyday lives, these are we call them haters. These are haters, right? Everybody knows a hater. We know what a hater is. We all have haters. Haters are people who hate you because you are not like them, right?
Yeah.
We all know what that is. Every high school movie has these people, right?
Yeah.
And then you have this interesting middle ground called, these people are called assimilationists. This is what most of us are, right? Assimilationism is the thing that says, I'm going to be somebody else in order to fit into the structure of whiteness, quote unquote whiteness, right? So for instance, if you want to be on this movie, you have to be a certain kind of Black person. You have to look a certain kind of way, have a certain kind of education, all of which is close to what I associate with myself, which in this case would be whiteness, right? As a white person. You can't have, don't be rough around the edges, which is not really a thing. It's just I have different cultural codes and different ways of doing things. But if that black person is accepted, it's called assimilationism, and it's still racist, right? So it's basically what I would call your fake friends. You know what I
Sure.
mean? The person that says, I like you as long as you act like me.
Right.
Then you're okay. Then you're good with me, right?
Right.
Exceptionalism, right? And then there's this last group, which is what we're all trying to be. And this is the group that is anti-racist. Now, anti-racist is now a word that we hear every day. It's everywhere. And let me explain very, very easily about what anti-racist actually means. It simply means that you're willing to love a person because they are like themselves. That's it,
Yeah.
right? I love you because you are like you, not like me, not like you are like you, and that is enough for you to belong and exist in whatever space you choose to belong and exist in. The way you talk, the way you dress, who you love, who you pray to, none of those things are of any importance, right? I love you because you are you, and you belong here because you exist, right?
Right.
That is all anti-racism is. It leads with love and love alone. Love and love alone. Not all the extra, not all the conditions about like where your hair is thick, where you got tattoos on your face, where you come from Harlem and you grew up in the projects, or whatever people make up in their minds and their imaginations of who black people are. This is saying I don't care what the circumstances are. You exist in the world, therefore you deserve life, liberty, justice, equality, and at the utmost, you deserve freedom. Period.
Yeah.
Young people, if you can carry that with you in your life, then the world looks better 10 years from now.
It will. I think it will. I think people are, I mean, I have faith. I'd
For
like to
sure.
have faith. I
Listen,
yeah, I mean, do you feel hopeful?
you're 23 years old. I got about 15 years on you. So because I can look at you as a 23-year-old and seeing the conversation that we're having, what you're trying to have and continuously trying to have, I have hope. I think your generation will be the generation that turns the corner. And I really do mean that.
I agree. I think there's a lot of people that are willing to listen and educate themselves and and fight for other humans, because that's what we are at the end of the day. We're
That's
all
it.
one human race.
One human race. We've been
Yeah.
tricked.
Yeah, for real.
Really.
Um, I can't wait to read your book. I'm so happy I was sent it and that I was introduced to you. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk to people who otherwise, may not have heard of your book, which is stamped, which
Yeah.
I will put a little link to in our live so people can check it out. But but thank you again. I really really appreciate it, and I'll reach out to you when I finish reading it and let you know.
Holla at me. Let me know what you
Yeah,
think.
I will. Thank you
All
so
right.
much again.
For sure, for sure. Peace,
See
Lily.
ya.
Take care.
Bye.